Welcome and Maukio. My name is Shawn Stevens, and I'm from the Stockbridge Band of Mohicans. We are located in Bowler, Wisconsin, but I have the honor to be here in the homelands in the Berkshires, in Berkshire County, to show you all how to make fire by friction, also known as the bow draw. Now, in making fire, for me, especially in how we do it in our ceremonial ways, for me, making fire, I had an elder ask me once, and he said, "Do you think you can carry a fire for a mile?" I said, "Yeah, I think I can do that." And he said, "All right, you think you can carry it for 10 miles?" I said, "Yeah, I think I can do that too." Then he asked me, he said, "Do you think you can carry it for 1,000 miles?" And so I got feeling, okay, he's getting at something here. So I said, okay, I don't know. And he told me, as long as you've got it in here, and you've got it in here, you can carry it no matter where you go, all over this whole world. And that meant so much to me to be able to carry fire. And for our ceremonial fires, is the fire starts with a thought, and that thought causes a little electrical charge in your brain. And when you're doing these things, that electrical charge goes down, the energy goes down through your body, into your hands, into these tools, and it's funneled into a little insignificant, tiny, small spot. Not insignificant, I'm sorry, infinitesimal, small spot, kind of. And once you get that ember going and it ignites and you make fire, that energy, that fire, it came from you. And in our teachings, that fire is a spirit, and that spirit is always there, and channeling it through your own body into the fire. And that's what it means so much to me to be able to do this fire in this sort of way. All right. Now, before we begin, we're going to have to go out and get a few supplies. So I'm going to go out and find me a bow, and I'm going to grab me some stuff from around this area to make a tinder bundle, and we're going to get started. All right? Cool.
You want to say something about that?
Oh, you got to make sure if you want to find a good bow, if you have something that's a little curved already. Now, they usually say a good length of the bow is from your shoulder to the tip of your arms. But I like to go a little bit farther because if you have a little bit more room on the string, that'll give you more rotations each push you make forward and backwards. Okay? Now, you don't want your stick to be too heavy, too big, something that's going to make your arm really tired. Something around the size of your thumb, or a man's thumb, should say, if you're a female, sorry. And nice and thick, but not too thick, and has a little bit of give. Okay? Now, what you want to do is find a lot of dried vegetation. And this is goldenrod here. Now, luckily, we're heading towards fall, and you can find a lot of this stuff here. A lot of grass. You can find grasses and goldenrod, or some of them little like cotton, like little plant pods you can find. Just get a whole bunch of it because we're going to need to make what's called a tinder bundle. That's what we're going to put our little ember when we create it inside the tinder bundle to make it ignite into a flame. So you want to get quite a bit of this. Okay? Now, earlier in the summer, or if it's rained, it's like, what do? All your stuff's wet. Now, we're not going to do that today. I'm just going to explain to you really quick. What I would do is find some old dead trees, some logs or something that you can, or branches, that you can peel the bark back to the dry layer. And then what you have to do is take your knife and make tiny little, itty bitty little slivers. It takes a long time to do, but once you get a big pile of it, you can use that as a tinder bundle as well. Good dry tinder bundle. But luckily, we've got lots of this. a lot of tall grass, which works really good. You want your outer edge of your little tinder bundle, or nest if you want to call that, with a lot of that real good dry grass. But the more you go in towards the center, you want more softer, more things that, if you can imagine a little drop of coal going in there, that's going to ignite it. We've got a lot of this goldenrod out here, so we'll be using that for now. But in the summer, you can use cattail. Old dead cattail works really good for the center. Um, the milkweed pods that they have, but that's late summer actually. But for now, all this goldenrod, anything dry and like grass, will do very, very, very well. All right, so here's some of the tools we're gonna need. And we got our tinder bundle full of dried stuff, grasses, leaves. You don't really want to use like tree leaves. Some of these goldenrod leaves are great. Tree leaves are not very good for initially starting a bundle fire. What we have here, which is we call our hearth board, this is where we're going to create a little ember. Now that's the important thing that we're going to do here. I've got the hearth board. This here is the spindle, and this is called many names, but this is a piece of antler, but I call it the top block that we'll be using. And we'll have the stick here. This is going to be our bowl in a second. And if you can kind of get the idea of going back and forth, creating the spinning motion. Now what happens is we create the spinning motion and it creates friction. And the friction is what we want. Now your top of your spindle has to be very thin because it's going to fit into a little spot on the top, this top block. The bottom part has to be wider. Now the wider it is, the more friction it'll cause down here. You want your friction down here, not up here. Now, in a natural setting, of course, have a piece of antler, some bone will work. But if you want to go out into the woods, sometimes what you're going to need, see, these are things that are already made. One of the most perfect things you can find is if you ever see those little dead straight pine trees. They're probably about 5-6 feet tall. And they're all full of their needles are all turned orange and rusty color and stuff. It's dead. What you can get, you'll get all of these items out of that tree because it's super straight. That's what you need for your spindle. It has to be straight. It can't be bent or wobbly because it'll mess everything up later on. And you also can take it and split that tree down the center, and like where you see branches that come off, that's where a knot is going to be. You can split that piece of wood down the middle, and you can use that piece for a top block. But you need a harder piece of wood on top, because otherwise what will happen, if I have a regular piece of wood like this drilling on top, it's going to drill right through the top. And that's not what we want. We want something harder on top. You can use a real flat stone, but finding the perfect flat stone that's not going to chew this all up and to save you a lot of time looking all around, you can find like a piece of bone or a piece of antler. Okay? Now, one of the main things you really need in doing this is a good knife. Now, when you're out in the woods, I like to carry 2 knives, actually. A bigger knife that'll do like a lot of chopping, but you also want a smaller knife to do more intricate things, and these are the important ones. You want to be used to your knife. Okay, so because you're going to be using it in all different directions, flipping it around, twisting it, and you want that knife to be almost like an extension of your hand. You must be used to your knife, and you have to be very careful. If you're not used to using a knife, you need to be very careful. And how can you get used to using your knife? Well, if you ever see like them old timers and maybe old movies or something, they're sitting on the porches and they're just whittling, and that's all they're doing, just whittling. And that makes a very good practice for you to get to know your knife. Okay? And when you're cutting and whittling, you want to make sure your knees aren't in the way. You want to make sure nobody else is around you, because when you're whittling sometimes, or carving, no matter what you do, you'll get to a part where your knife will catch. And naturally you want to give it a little more oomph, but sometimes when it gives, you can cut your leg. You don't want to cut any artery. You don't want to cut your leg at all. Or you don't want to go out and hurt somebody else as well. So whenever your knife catches, that's when you know you have to stop and be very mindful of your next move. Okay, kind of back it off, and use it a little more. Don't be afraid to use your thumb on the back of the knife. I like little simple, knives like this that what they call have a full tang. That means where your knife, the metal goes all the way back to the end. If you got them little ones where they just connect in front, that knife's not going to last you very long. So make sure you pick a knife not only fits well in your hand, but you can move around and manipulate very easily one-handedly. But just keep shaving and shaving and shaving. Practice it. Try not to go upwards unless you've got a lot of good skill and you're used to stopping, when you get to that point. Always go outward. All right. Now, I want to show you something, how to do something. We're going to do kind of a cheat today. Today we're not going to use these. I want to show you something on how that you can practice this, because it's very hard for you to go out into the woods, find a piece of bone, find a piece of antler, or that piece of of rock or whatever it is, to find that straight pine tree. Some of you might live in the city or in the suburbs. You might not just be able to go and chop stuff down, or your hearthboard. Now, what I'm going to show you, is that you can go to your hardware store or a local lumber store and buy things like this. This is just wooden dowling. It's pine. Okay. Same with this board. I bought a pine board and I cut it down into little strips. That's gonna be about almost as thick as usual. Your tree that you're gonna split down to use as a hearth board. You want to make sure that you see all these lines in there. That's usually where the lines get real hard, like right here. That's where the knots are. Remember when I was telling you, if you want a top piece block, you want to use that part of the board. Of course, hopefully it was more over this way. This is only half of it. And that's what you can use for the top block. You just kind of put a little divot in there. Be very careful with your knife. And utilize it, because if that being hard is going to stop the spindle from being chewed up or drilling straight through. You want more friction on the bottom. Okay. Now here, before I get too far, we'll go ahead. With this, I'm going to show you how we start. Because if you go down to the hardware store and stuff, you can buy these. They usually come in 4-foot lengths. You take it home, you can saw it, down to your length that you want. I always say that your spindle should be around the length of your knee down to your ankle. Okay? Because when we're going to be working this, your hand needs to be around your knee and keep it straight. The shorter it is, the more you got to be hunched over, and the more harder it is to keep that rope going on this little space. If you have a longer space to work with, it's going to be much easier to work with. Okay? But what we're going to do is you take it, and we're going to keep going around in a circle. And what we have to do is sort of replicate this here. If you have an electric sander at home, you can make it look like this, and we can still manipulate that. But chances are, this is where, like I said, you need those knife skills. Be very patient. You're not going to, be perfect at this once. This is a skill that indigenous people from all over the world have perfected over thousands and thousands of years. All of our ancestors did this, and they knew that you have to be patient, because if you're impatient and you're out there trying to just grab whatever and try to make it work, you're going to find out you're going to fail a whole lot more often. And when you're failing, especially if you only have a little bit of time, if it's a survival mode, you got to make sure that you pick your tools the right way. You got to make sure that you manipulate them and shape them in the right way first, just to save your energy. Okay. Now, I'm going to keep going like that in a little bit. But I also want to show you, and we'll come back later. I'm not going to make you watch me do the whole thing. But I'm also going to prepare the bow here. Now, what I like to do, like I said, told you before, it's usually arm's length from your shoulder, but I like to go a little longer just to get that extra little pull. Depending on the strength of your arm and the weight of the stick, you can go a little bit longer than that. Now, what I like to do, cordage. We also need cordage. Now, When I was taught that we're going out in the woods, you need two things, no matter what you're doing. If you're just going on a hike, you're whatever you're doing, camping, whatever, you need to have one, a knife, and a very good pair of bootlaces. Now, when they say bootlaces, for one, is because your bootlaces can be used for cordage in many different ways. If you have cordage and a good knife, that'll bring you anything that you need. It'll bring you food, it'll bring you fire, it'll bring you shelter, bring you everything that you need. So, if for any kind of surprise survival, thing that you might run into, always make sure you have a good knife, a good pair of boots on. And the bootlaces also remind you should be wearing boots in the woods, not flip flops or tennis shoes or anything like that as well. Wearing boots, you have cordage right away. You don't have to remember it, but a good knife and cordage. Now, what I like to do is to measure how long I'll need. Well, we'll go with one. Measure how much. Always go a little bit more. Then double that over. Now, you see a lot of people will use one string, but if you've got the cordage, this is a much better way of doing it to give that cord a little bit more strength. Okay. Now at this end, make a little loop, just like that. And I purposely find an end where it branches out. That way I can put this loop on there and it naturally holds that. No problem. Okay? Then I'm going to come back here. Some people will notch the bottom. Some people will notch around the outside. I'm going to notch around the outside. Now, if you're not used to this, you can put the... let me move this. You put the bow on a solid piece of foundation and just push a little bit at a time. Take your time. Don't be in a hurry. Because when you're in a hurry, that's when accidents can happen. And it takes a little bit, but the more patience that you have, and the slower you go, the more accurate you can be, and the more chances you have of making that first call. Now, if you're somebody that goes and follows through with this, you'll know exactly what I mean. Okay? So we're going to pause for a little bit, and we're going to come back when I have this completely notched around, and we'll pick up from there. Alright, we got the beginning of our spindle. Now, because this is a wooden dowel, it's real smooth on the center part here. And that's not what we really want. So we kind of want to make it a little bit more natural. Make like these little ridges, just like you're whittling again. But you don't want to go too far in, too deep. Okay, make it a good part of the center, because that rope is going to travel a little bit. Okay, good. Now, tie up the bow. We got that finished too. Like I said, put a little loop. Hopefully you got a little fork in the end, where it'll hold on real tight and you don't have to worry about tying knots and stuff. And got this little notch dug all the way around here. Working really good. And I say, because this will take a little practice for you too, how to tie it on to get it to stay on. But you want to give it a little bend, begin to wrap it. Now, I do things, maybe a little differently that you do, but we're going to tie this, so one of these ends of the rope have to go one way, and the other one has to go the other way, this way. Okay, so we go, make sure it's good and tight. Now, before we go on to the next part, I want to show you something real quick. Now, this is how you're going to load the spindle onto your bow if you are right-handed. Okay? This is if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, you just do everything the opposite direction. Okay? Now, your spindle. Remember, I told you that the thin part is the part that goes to the top block. The more beveled part on the bottom, that goes to the hearth board. So you want to hold your spindle in a way, that represents that direction. Okay. When you take your bow, what you want to do is go bring it up to the line, grab it a little bit lower than mid. Okay. You want to go over and under. Okay. You see how that kind of snaps into place like that? That's how you know that your bow is good and tight. It snaps in there like that. All right. Now, when you walk around and you need to grab other things, is you're going to find out it's real hard to get used to it. All you have to do is keep pushing, grab the rope and the spindle. So you can get other things if you have to grab them and such. But I'm going to show you that again. Hold it just like the thin part towards the up, the bevel part towards the bottom, over and under. Okay? That might take you some time, but always remember, over and under. Now your spindle should be on the outside of this line. Sometimes you'll do it, and I've done it many times, and it'll end up on the inside. You don't want it on the inside, okay? You want it on the outside of the line. The spindle on the outside of this bowstring, okay? Alright, so here's our hearth board, okay? Now, if you go down to like I said, to the local wood store and such, you can find, 2x4s, 1x4s, all kinds of different ones. You don't want them really thicker than, maybe 1.25 inches or so, so you can ask them for like 1x4s. If they have 1x1s would be good. But you want a nice thick area to where you can put this in the center. Now what we need to do is to burn a hole. I'm going to draw you out a little illustration here. Like this is our board. And we're going to make a hole, just like with these ones here. This will be our hole in the center of the board. Okay. Now you want to make sure there's at least 1/4 inch or maybe about 1/8 of an inch on both sides. This hole cannot be touching the edge. If it's touching the edge, you're going to lose everything what you're working hard for. Okay. But what we're going to do is we're going to cut a little wedge into this hole here. Now what that does is you're going to see when I start to burn into the wood, you're going to see all these little fibers. It looks like ash, and sometimes I call it ash, but it's not ash. They're tiny little fibers that are worn down from the bottom piece of the wood and also the bottom piece of the spindle. They both disintegrate at the same rate. That's why I always say make sure that your wood, your hearthboard, and your spindle are the same exact type of wood. You want to use something soft like either pine. Pine is the best. Cedar. Other types of soft wood. Do not try to use maple or oak because you can still do it, but it's going to take you a lot longer and a lot more energy. But in cutting this hole, see what we're doing is we're burning that hole in a back and forth motion. And this whole little opening here is going to fill full of fibers. And with those fibers, like I said, they're just little pieces, little pieces of the wood that have been, and it looks burnt, but it's not burnt. But it's going to fill up, and you want that whole opening to fill up full of them fibers, all the way to the top and little out the bottom. And then when we get that, that's when we're going to go into overdrive and really start getting that spindle going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then what's happening is that you're getting more friction down here. Now, without this hole, you're going to see all of them, like I said, all of the fibers collect around the outside, and all the heat does as well. So what that notch does is gives us a little place to make a little bit, I like to call it sometimes a little biscuit in the oven door, or whatnot, my little cute words for it. Or, just to keep it going so we get all this wind, all this hot air. The hot air will no longer escape around the sides like the fibers. It's all going to be shoved right out this little biscuit, of material that we make. And right in the center, when you're going down, you've got to go down at least probably about 1/4 of an inch. Because what we need is this fiber not only has to be filled up this whole doorway here, it has to be all the way to the top. So what you get is that rush of air coming through the center or just a little off center of that little pile of dust. It's not going to stop the top of the dust on fire or the very bottom. It's got to be more towards the center because it has a lot of that insulation around there. And it's not a spark, anything like that, like with, flint and steel. It's just very extreme hot air being funneled through this little doorway, which is going to give us our ember. Okay? Okay, one more thing. Like I said, this is like our fire bow, fire drill hack. We're kind of cheating here a little bit. But to do why we're doing it this way, and I'm telling you, you can go down and get the materials to do this because it's very, very hard to go out and find all this material in the woods, or if you live in the city or in the suburbs and such, So what I was telling you about having your hearth board and your spindle, and you also need that top block. Well, what works really well, a little comical, is a pop can or an old beer can. And what I like to do is kind of push it on the sides, and you want to crush it down a little bit. If you don't have quite strong hands, put it on the ground and try to slowly crush it down. You don't want it to go to the edge too much, to where it comes down more straight. And it's perfect because most people can grab onto this and hold onto it. Now, why I'm doing this is that you guys get your form and your muscle memory and your everything that you need, and you're going to know how it feels. You're going to know how it feels when this goes into the wood. You're going to know how it feels to have it drilling down here and how you have less friction up here. Once you understand it, it's like learning how to ride a bicycle. You have to have the right muscle memory. You have to know the right balance. There's the right amount of pressure you put on this side, or the speed that you're going with the bow. But this is a way to kind of cheat to help you get to this point. Because if you try to go out and find this stuff in the woods, a lot of people are gonna give up. But if I can get you to make an ember from here, I know you'll be able to go out in the woods and to be able to recreate these things, whether it's a piece of wood with a knot in the top there, or a piece of bone, or if you can find your little pine tree. If you can't find a pine tree, if you can find at least some good straight sticks, branches coming off from the pine tree. Don't look at anything laying on the ground. Anything laying on the ground is going to be too waterlogged and rotten. You want something that's at least leaning or growing off of the tree. If your spindle's a little warped in the middle, do like I said, with that old man whittling, and you got to make it to where it becomes more naturally straight. A little bit of wobble is fine, but if you have too much wobble, what's going to happen is it sends too much vibration down into your hearth board, and then it shakes all of your fiber pile. And if that's happening, you're not going to get that rush of air, and it's not going to catch on fire. So you want to make sure everything feels great. Once you get this feeling done with this, then you can go in the woods. What you just have to replicate that feeling by manipulating what you have out there. And there's a lot of videos you can find that'll give you tips and such on there. But once you've got this down, I call it the hack, and it helps you save a lot of time, and it helps you save from giving up as well. So what we want to get is that little ember that we can put in our little tinder bundle there, our little nest, and create a fire. Okay. Now what you want to do is put a little dimple. And what I do is put the top on there, and you want to take maybe like your hearth board and just tap it. Give it a couple taps. It gives a tiny little dimple. Because if you go too hard, you'll go right through the can. That's still pretty thin. It's the hardest part on the can, but it's thin enough that you can go through. But just give it a little bitty dimple. It's concave, so if you waver a little bit, it should always find its way back. Okay? Okay, now what we're going to start is what I call the initial burn. This takes some time. Okay? Now what you want to do, like I said, you want to be in the center here. If you take a good look at this real quick, you see this crack? Don't drill into cracks, because what's going to happen is a lot of that heat's going to escape through cracks. So you want to make sure that your board is more solid where you're drilling into. So instead of avoiding that, we're going to come down here, and we want to make a point to make sure that the spindle, we still have room on both sides when that hole gets there, because this has to become all the way flush with the board, before we can actually make a fire. Okay, because that gives us maximum amount of friction down at the bottom. All right. Now, what we'll do, you want to find a nice flat piece of ground. To start. Make sure that your board's not like going up or down. You want to make sure it's good and flat, so it's not going to move. All right. Now with your form, what you're gonna want to do is put. Okay, you're right-handed, but if you're left-handed, you do this backwards. You're right-handed. Take your left foot and place it on the board. Where that ball of your foot, is right on the board. Okay. Now you're going to want to take a step back and kneel down. Now your form, the best way to explain it is to see if you have a triangle, or not triangle, I'm sorry, rectangle or square right here. You don't want to have your knee a little too far ahead. You don't want to have it too far back. Now what this does is it puts maximum weight on that board. If that board moves back and forth this way, it's going to mess up your pile, your dust pile. If it vibrates, it's going to mess it up. So that's why it's got to be nice and flat and make sure it doesn't move. And this foot keeps that from moving. Okay. Now, what we're going to do initially is find the center of the board. Give a good little twist. That's what's going to start us. Okay. You see that? Now, with our bow, again, what we're going to do, skinny part up, little part down, or bevel part down, over and under. See that? Over and under. Now, if you have to hold on to it, like I said, hold on to the string and the spindle. That takes a little bit of practice. And you put it down inside. Okay. All right. Now, once you have that little point down into the hole, you want to take your can, your top block, or whatever you call it, and find that little center we put in there. And now what you're going to want to do is put your hand onto your knee, your wrist. This is what's going to keep your spindle straight up and down. Your spindle should not be angled in any kind of way other than straight up and down. And that's what putting your wrist, locking it to your knee, is going to help. Okay. Now in starting, you don't want a lot of pressure. Just kind of want to, there's Mr. Worm coming out. Go back and forth. Now if you see, if you hold it down or up, see how that rope travels? You don't want that to happen too much. Okay. Because if you get it too high, it's going to kick the top out. If you get it too low, it's going to kick the bottom out. So you got to practice. And this is what's going to take you some time to get this down. Because if you're not used to this, if you're not used to it, it's going to wear you out a little bit. Now you don't want to come too high, because you see how the rope rubs on each other? If you do that too much, it's going to cut the rope. So you have to have it at a small angle where it just travels up and down a little bit. Okay? And then you just keep going. Practice this. Add a little more pressure. You want to go until you see smoke. See that smoke coming? Okay, we're going to stop. I want to show you something. Now, that's like I told you. All these little fibers, they come equally around the hole. We don't want that because the heat does the same. That little notch is going to funnel it all straight through. Alright, through the magic of Hollywood, paused, and I ain't gonna lie, it took me a couple times, because unless you're in like really good shape, or you do this often, it's gonna take you. This first initial burn in is what takes the longest. So this took me a couple minutes, and I took a couple breaks, but you see how we got all this black, matter here. And well, let's walk over to the table here. We'll put this on the paper. And all that is fibers, and it looks like it's burnt, but actually it's just been very superheated. So it's kind of like charcoal almost. It's been superheated so much that this is what we're looking to get in an end result for our little dust pile. Is this material. Some of it's light brown, some of it's very dark. But with our initial burn-in, which is this is what I like to call, because like I said, remember, you got to be at least a 1/4 inch down before you're going to get a fire. So right around here. And so we took a few breaks. Now, what can happen is if this gets too glossy, or your top here gets too glossy, what you can do is kind of come along and rough it up a little bit, for one. And that's the thing, is take lots of breaks. Don't be in too much of a hurry. If you get winded, sit back, take a break, look at your tools, make sure everything's good. If this is kind of glossy, you can scrape it up, scratch it around, or you can take like a little tiny little insignificant amount of sand or something and put it in there, so when you start again, it roughs everything up and you'll get that smoke coming again. But now what we're going to do is we're going to put that notch in here. Now, if you're really good at doing things, you can take another piece of wood and kind of take your knife and just keep going back and forth. And keep going in. Okay. All right. Usually what I do is, because I'm very used to using a knife, okay? If you're not that used to it, you have to be very careful. It's just taking a little shave off both sides, in and out. But I don't suggest you do this unless you've got maybe some kind of cut-proof cloth or something on top of your knee, or just use it on a table like I'm doing here, and use the back of your thumb to kind of press in and keep making that notch. Now we have to at least break the circle here. But what I like to do is go in a little bit further. Some people will go all the way even to the center, with that notch. But we don't have to go that far. But I like to come in, because this side's a little closer, I like to come in a little bit and more. And so that way all that friction from that circle goes out this little doorway here. Okay? Right, now what you want to make sure before you're done, so we've got a good opening there. I like to call that the oven door, because if what happens when you open up the oven door, all the heat comes out that way, right? Now, when you're making this, you can see like these little ridges. Sometimes you have these little fibers that are sticking out. You want to make sure that this oven door is nice and smooth, because if it's not nice and smooth, see what's going to happen is all this stuff, when it's built up there, if it's not nice and smooth, when we go to remove the hearth board, it's going to grab onto all of the fibers. And we don't want that, because that little fiber pile is so fragile. If it falls over, your ember's gone. If it grabs onto it and you got to try to dig it out, you can really mess it up. So not only make sure that the sides are smooth, but we also kind of want to we're looking at the board this way, okay? You want to make sure that your notch is a little wider at the bottom here, okay? This is the top here. That way when we take the board away, it has like a little pyramid effect. It has a good base, so it doesn't fall over so easy. If it was straight up and down, a lot of times it'll fall. So if we give it a wide base like that, it's more likely to stand still. Okay? Alright. Got our notch cut in there. Like I said, the bottom is a little wider, so we make a good sort of a pyramid kind of shape. Now, what I wanted to tell you is, what I did before, is to make sure that when you cut that notch in, because you want to make sure that your spindle bottom here is flush. See how it's flush there? And we'll get the maximum amount of friction. So what you want is that notch to come to the bottom of the hole. Okay, so that way the fibers don't have to come up and over, the heat don't have to come up and over. It just comes straight out. Okay. Now we're going to use this piece of paper. Normally, you can use, like if you're out in nature and stuff, you can use a leaf, because you want to have something that you can grab that little ember with. But I want to use paper so you can get a good idea and see how that fills everything up in there. Okay. Now this you just have to go steady, add a little pressure, because once we get that filled, we have to go super fast. Now you can kind of see how some of them fibers are starting to fill up in there. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to try to wing it and go real fast. Fast as you can, for as long as you can. Oh. When you get to this part, be patient. A lot of people want to bend over and blow on that. But if you did it right, you won't have to. What you want to do is put your hand down. Take your spindle. Uh-oh. Houston, we have a problem. Okay, it didn't work. But when you're first starting out, that's the way it usually happens. Okay, attempt number 2. Like I said, you're going to have to take a lot of breaks doing this. Nobody ever, gets it on that first try, usually. Now what was happening is that we're still not deep enough into the wood. And so where that air is being pushed out, it's being pushed out more toward the top of the dust pile rather than more towards the center. And that dust pile needs insulation on both sides, in front and back, in order for that ember to keep burning. So what I like to do is keep all that dust there so we don't have to create so much more. And we're gonna have to get it super hot again. And once I feel we have enough there, then we start going into overdrive again. Okay, here we go. Okay, go fast now. Oh, look at that. If there's no wind, use your hand to fan it. And once it's going, don't be in too much of a hurry. It's working. You can hear me huffing and puffing. I'm catching my breath. And what I like to do is fan it until you see the red ember shine through. There we go. You can see it. There. Now, I'm going to grab our dust pile. Remember, that'll be fine for a while. You don't have to hurry. We're going to put our ember in the center, and we want to kind of fold it up a little bit. We don't want to crush the ember. We want to fold it just so that ember will make a bigger coal in here. And we have fire. We had fire. Ooh. There. Success. Fire. And that's from using your own energy. Starts with a thought. And that energy goes through your body, through these tools, into this bundle. And that's just energy that's been transferred into another form. I'm sitting there playing with this. If you're trying to make a fire, you should have your fire built already, okay? So when the flames do come, you stick it in there and you get it going. You know, if you play with it too much, it's going to go out. Looks like it's running out here, but I just want to show you how big them coals get. Okay, grab a little bit more grass because I just wanted to emphasize that when you're blowing on it, you kind of want that heat where it's going upwards. Because no matter how dry your grass and your bundles is, there's still a little bit of water. But of course, you know, heat goes upwards. So when you're blowing on it, it's super heating, super dehydrating the plants and stuff that are above it. So when you keep blowing, Woo. But well, it's not exactly working right now. But I only had a chance to run and grab a little. But when we had that flame, that's when you put it into your fire pit with all your birch bark and all your everything. So when the flames are there, you take advantage of it. It's sometimes even showing you now how hard it can be to re-get a flame, restart a flame. Wouldn't be too hard because we have a coal going here and it'll smolder for a while and we can get more stuff to going, you know, but it's always best to have your fire pit and everything that you have ready. So when that flame comes out like we had it, you just put it underneath there and it just takes off. now I'm just still kind of playing around with it. And you had your fire pit, you still put it in there and just blow on it until it catches fire. Ooh, there we go. That's where you put it on there. Say, okay, we got fire. Don't screw around. Put it in there. And it'll go. And by now the rest of your stuff would have started on fire. And then you have your fire pit. Now, one of the things is like when we're making that little, and ashes all over. When you're making that little ember, sometimes you can blow that out. You might crush it or it didn't work. And so what I like to use is like an ember extender, and that's like if you see them old cattails, when that are already puffed out a little bit. And you take that ember and you blow it on that cattail and it just makes a huge ember. So what you can do is take a little piece of that, stuff it into your bundle, and try to get it ignited. If it doesn't work, you can go ahead and grab another piece of that glowing ember instead of having to go through all of that over again. And so there's just little tricks to the trade, and going through, I kind of skipped a lot of things and showing you how long it can take. But when you do this, I mean, you go down to the hardware store. You can buy these things real cheap. All right, so we have success. Now, like through editing, like I said, we took a lot of breaks. At the most important thing I can tell you is take breaks and don't give up. This did not come easy for me. A lot of times it took me my own mistakes and learning from what I've done. All you need to do is just sit back. If you're getting frustrated, take a break. Look over your tools, make sure everything's done properly the way it's supposed to be, and go back at it. The more you try at it, the more you do it, the more you will be gifted with that ember. And that's what I like to say is that you're gifted because you put so much sacrifice in your own time that the spirits, the gods, gifted you with that ember, and then you can make that ceremonial fire. So never give up. Keep doing it. You can do this. You got this. Oh.